Welcome back to Where Are They Now, the series where we look at a group of related games which have been out for at least a couple of years and try and answer the question, where are they now? Today we're looking at the FPS/MOBA genre. This genre features games which are generally first or third person shooters, but borrows certain elements from MOBAs, most commonly abilities and an ever-growing roster of characters known as heroes or champions and so on. Today we're going to look at a couple of FPS/MOBAs which we've never talked about before, as well as revisit a couple of games that we have talked about nearly 2 years ago to see if anything has changed, and once again ask the question, where are they now? A quick shout out to Default, Shork, Lucas, Inek and Ran the Rat for supporting this channel by being YouTube channel members. You can also support the channel by becoming a member, by checking out my merch, or simply enjoying this video.
Woo! Check it out, Casper!
First up is Paladins. Originally released in public beta in September 2016 by Hi-Res Studios and is now maintained by the internal studio Evil Mojo. Paladins fits firmly into the FPS MOBA genre, with multiple characters to choose from known as champions, ability-based gameplay, and also a mechanic referred to as cards, which allows the player to choose unique buffs for their character on a per-match basis. It's important to note that the game is, and always has been, free to play, a factor which will of course impact how popular a game is and for how long it can survive in the very competitive space of online multiplayer games. Paladins is also a game that we looked at nearly 2 years ago in this series, so let's see what's changed, or indeed, what hasn't. Whilst Paladins and some of the other games in this video are available on consoles, for the purposes of this video we're only going to be looking at the PC versions. Because Paladins is available on Steam, we are able to look at pretty accurate and consistent historical player numbers from websites like Steam Charts. Here we can see that in October 2018, when we covered this game last, Paladins was maxing out at around 29,000 concurrent players a month. For those of you who don't look at player numbers on multiplayer games very often, I can tell you that this isn't anywhere near the top, but it's still very good. This means that most regions at most times of the day aren't going to have particularly long queue times, apart from in the extremely high skill groups and extremely low skill groups in instances of skill-based matchmaking. Since then, however, we have seen a steadily fluctuating maximum player count, dipping as low as 20,000 in mid-2019, but then going all the way back up to 29,000 again in April 2020. That was until June 2020, where the game actually had its worst month on record, peaking at just 17,900 maximum concurrent players. Now, there are many factors which might be affecting this number. For example, it's not uncommon to see a dip in player numbers for most games throughout the summer, as of course, weather is improved, causing more people to do stuff outdoors, and it's also a popular period for people to go on vacation. We also have to consider the ongoing coronavirus situation, which is affecting all industries in a number of ways. And indeed, we can see a similar dip across many multiplayer games on Steam, which have similar peaks in April, and then they sort of go downhill towards June. But I don't think either of those points alone exactly justify Paladins having its worst month ever. And that's not by a small margin. This is nearly half of what we saw in just April this year. At 4 years old, Paladins is very much a mature online game. It's around this time that we see in a lot of multiplayer games where the veterans and long-time players are just moving on. Even people who love the game probably start to feel a little bit apathetic towards the same game over and over again. On top of this, if we look on forums and Steam reviews, we can see that there is a growing frustration towards many developer decisions, including a slower frequency of updates, a focus on skins instead of features, and just a lack of bug fixes. In reality, it's probably a combination of all of these things that have led to Paladins' declining numbers and its worst month on record. That is, as opposed to one particularly bad mistake causing a lot of players to leave the game. However, 17,000 maximum players is still pretty healthy, and there shouldn't be many problems finding games in most populated regions at most times of the day. Paladins is consistently still in the top 100 most played games on Steam at any given time, so whilst that's by no means a blockbuster, it's still pretty good. We have discussed in previous episodes in this series that games can be alive with just a few hundred players a month, so although it's true that the player base of Paladins is declining, it doesn't appear to be close to, the internet's favourite word, dead. Even if developer updates continue to slow to a stop. As long as the servers are kept online and there are enough people playing for matches to be found, Paladins will still be alive. And as a free-to-play game, even if veterans continue to quit due to burnout or frustrations, there will always be new people come into the game. So where is Paladins now? Sure, it's not where it used to be, but it's still in a pretty solid place. The second game we're looking at in this episode is Gigantic. Gigantic launched in beta in August 2015 and had its full release around 2 years later in July 2017. Developed by indie studio Motiga Games and published by Perfect World Entertainment, Gigantic's gameplay is third-person shooter and MOBA combined, with a few of its own twists. In fitting with the genre, Gigantic of course has multiple heroes with unique abilities, but the main twist in Gigantic's gameplay is that each team is working alongside an NPC known as a Guardian. The gameplay involves capturing objectives, or summoning other NPC creatures to capture objectives for you, and defeating opponents in order to power up your team's Guardian, who will then pin down the opponent's Guardian and make them vulnerable to the player's attacks. The game launched to generally favourable reviews from both critics and players, and being a free-to-play game available on Steam, it was very accessible to the PC market. Despite that, the game never really took off, and in January 2018, only 6 months after leaving beta, the developers announced that the game would be shut down in July of the same year, with their reasoning being that the game did not resonate with as many players as they had hoped, and that they were unable to break through into a crowded market. Essentially, there weren't enough players playing the game and buying in-game items to fund its continued development and support. If we look at the player numbers, we can see this story play out, with a solid launch of over 8,000 players, falling to just 1,500 in 2 months, and just 200 by the time that the devs announced that the game would be shut down. Player numbers maintained a little bit around that level for the next 6 months until the servers were turned offline. Pinning down the exact reason that a game doesn't succeed, especially one that wasn't objectively broken in any way, is never easy. But we know that Gigantic was entering a very competitive market at the time, with games like the aforementioned Paladins, as well as Paragon, Battleborn, and Overwatch, to name just a few, all releasing within a year of Gigantic. With so many games whose genres overlap with each other to some degree, all fighting for the attention and money of many of the same people, it's just a limited resource, and the unfortunate truth is that not all of them will survive. Despite the fact that the game is dead, in so much as there's no servers and there's no more development, that hasn't stopped dedicated fans trying to revive it, with a small number of players communicating via Discord to run private servers and organise occasional matches together. There are also a few spiritual successor fan projects, such as Project Stamina, who unashamedly say that their gameplay is based heavily on Gigantic's. So where is Gigantic now? Officially, sadly, it has passed away, but it does live on in the hearts of many of its fans. Next up, we've got Paragon. Paragon is a third-person MOBA from Epic Games. Epic Games are known for their widely used game engine, Unreal Engine, their early games such as Unreal Tournament, and more recently their absolute mega hit, Fortnite. Paragon was released in a paid beta in March 2016, and then it moved to a free-to-play beta around a year later in February 2017. Gameplay for the most part followed the traditional MOBA formula, with 3 lanes, bases, towers, jungles, minions, and of course a selection of heroes with abilities. Paragon's uniqueness came from the fact that instead of being a traditional top-down view, it fused a MOBA formula with a third-person action game, and it was also separated from other MOBAs by its simplified approach to the upgrade system, which revolved around card decks. Because Paragon never released outside of a beta, there are no reviews from trusted publications. However, user comments and discussions from Paragon's lifetime consistently praise its art and graphical fidelity, and many of the heroes and abilities were considered creative and fun. However, not every hero was loved, and balance was a frequent cause of concern for players. The main criticisms of the game were its aforementioned cards, which weren't so simple after all, and was generally believed to be off-putting to new and casual players. And add on to that the fact that the game was slow, both in terms of movement speed and match length. Epic did openly acknowledge both of these main concerns, and they did make efforts to improve those things. However, by January 2018, Epic made the decision that the game would be shut down just 3 months later, making it only in public beta for around a year. Epic did take the very commendable approach of refunding all money spent on the game, which you don't normally see in these situations. Whilst the game's closing announcement did cite that there wasn't a clear path to grow the game to retain enough players to be sustainable, earlier statements from Epic had openly admitted that Paragon developers had been moved over to work on Fortnite, and given Fortnite's massive success, then even those of us who don't like the fact that developers were moved, we can at least understand why that decision was made. Paragon's story doesn't end there, however, because 2 months after the shutdown announcement, Epic made another announcement that they were going to be releasing many of Paragon's assets of an estimated $12 million in value free to download for any developers who are building a game using the aforementioned Unreal Engine. In the 2 years plus since that has happened, many fan-made projects using those assets have emerged and are active today, such as Predecessor, Overprime, Ethereal Crash of Soul, Fault, and many more. So where is Paragon today? Well, it's dead, and the final blow was delivered by Fortnite. But the Fortnite money machine is probably what allowed Epic not only to refund all the players, but also release the assets for Paragon fans to use freely. It remains to be seen how successful any of these fan projects will grow to be, but the fact that they are there at all is a rather bright light in this game's otherwise dingy life. And finally, we've got Overwatch. Overwatch is a first-person hero shooter released in May 2016 by Blizzard Entertainment. Blizzard are the developers behind many massive game franchises such as Warcraft, Hearthstone, Diablo, and more. Overwatch's gameplay leans much more heavily towards the FPS side of the FPS/MOBA genre, only really borrowing heroes and abilities from MOBAs and doing everything else in a style more similar to other FPS games. At the time of its release, Overwatch was the game which stood out against the other FPS MOBA games, and it seemed to be the one that would survive, where others in the genre would not. And indeed, 2 years ago when we last asked the question, where are they now, about Overwatch, all signs seemed to be pointing to a game that was still by all accounts alive and well. But that was then. Where is Overwatch now? I'd like to take this moment to clarify that this series of videos aims to take as an objective look at the games that we talk about as possible. Overwatch is a game which, for one reason or another, people feel very strongly about. In this segment, I'm going to look at as much verifiable, quantitative data as possible regarding the game. I want that data to speak for itself. Based only on that data, will I attempt to answer the question, where is Overwatch now? Blizzard don't have any official active player numbers available for Overwatch, so let's look at where the game is now compared to 2 years ago based on a few other factors. First up, patch frequency and update size. Looking at this data, we'll be able to get an idea of where the game is in terms of lifetime support from its developers. In 2018, there was a total of 25 patches, including 4 new maps, 3 new heroes, and a few other significant features. In 2019, there were 24 updates, including 2 new maps, 2 new heroes, and again other significant features. So far in 2020, there has been 9 updates, including 1 new hero. Given that we're over halfway through the year, at this rate we would expect less than 20 updates total by the end of December. We of course again have to factor in the coronavirus situation, which will inevitably affect the development team that is now suddenly working under very different conditions. And, perhaps even more significantly than that, Blizzard announced in November 2019 that they're working on Overwatch 2, which is a sequel or expansion to the existing version of Overwatch. Of course, we don't know the exact amount, but it's going to stand to reason that there's going to be a number of developers, artists, and other Blizzard staff who have worked on Overwatch in the past now spending their time working on Overwatch 2. Given these two factors, whilst we do observe a downward trend in the update size and frequency, it certainly doesn't appear to be a case of developers giving up on the game, especially given the fact that any reduced development that we're seeing is more likely just a transfer of development to work on a sequel. Next, we're going to look at the activity on a few different media platforms over the last 2 years. Seeing how much people are engaging with a game outside of the game itself will give us an indication of where it is in terms of general popularity. For the sake of being consistent with the patch frequency that we just looked at, these figures are all from the start of January 2018 until July 2020. These charts show Twitch viewer trends, Twitch channel trends, and YouTube search trends respectively. Whilst there are a lot of peaks and troughs making it a little difficult to see exactly what's going on, we do observe in all three charts a gradual downward trend, ultimately meaning that there is less Overwatch activity on Twitch and fewer searches for it on YouTube than there was around 2 years ago. And that trend has been happening gradually since that time, as opposed to any significant event causing a big drop-off. I also want to include the activity of a popular forum. So here is some data for the main r/Overwatch subreddit. For those of you who aren't familiar with Reddit, it's basically a massive discussion board with smaller discussion boards for individual topics, such as Overwatch. Although the data on this particular chart only goes back to January 2019, looking at it, we can see the same sort of story being told. Activity in both people posting new discussions and people commenting on those discussions is in a downward trend. With that being said, we do have to stress the fact that downward does not mean dead, and downward does not mean dying. Indeed, if we look at Overwatch's Twitch stats over the past year, a relatively recent period, we can see that it's in the top 20 most popular games on Twitch in all 4 listed categories except peak channels where it's 31st. Being a game in the top 20 games on Twitch 4 years after it launched is a game which is still pretty popular. Similarly, if we look at view counts on Overwatch's official YouTube channel, developer vlogs and update teasers, we do see very high numbers. Certainly better numbers than other official developer channels with similar upload frequency, such as Paladins. So whilst we do see things on a downward trend, we do have to factor in the fact that Overwatch was extremely popular during its launch. So even though it's less popular now, when we look at that in the sort of global scope of games in general, it can still be a popular game. Of course, looking at figures like these will never be better than looking at player numbers, but they're certainly better than guesswork or speculation. If for any reason you don't consider this data fair indicators of a game's popularity and well-being, I do welcome you to suggest other data sources that you feel might paint a better picture in the absence of daily player numbers. Assuming that this data does give us a fair indication, what does it tell us to answer the question, where is Overwatch now? With Overwatch 2 in the works, we will inevitably see a boost in popularity from players, as well as a period of increased developer attention once it eventually releases. However, until that happens, Overwatch updates and community popularity are continuing to decrease. Although, at its current point, we still see Overwatch as a well-supported and popular game when compared to its peers. Next time in this series we could cover battle royales, card games, or looter shooters. Let me know which genre you would prefer. Thanks everyone for watching. Please consider checking out the previous episodes in this series which, even though are roughly 2 years old, are still mostly accurate today. Or please check out one of my other videos and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you, goodbye.